The battle took place in front of the immense warships. The metallic sound of the knights' swords filled the rainy night. There was a man in the Empire who was known as the Grim Reaper, and with his sword and somber gaze, he decimated his opponents. It was said in the kingdom that he was capable of turning a person into dust with just one look. Grim Reaper was regarded as a monster who did not hesitate to exterminate lives for the interests of the kingdom. He walked slowly toward a man who was embracing his dead son on the ground. The shine of the blood-stained blade gleamed under the moonlight as drops fell to the ground. Above all, he was a tyrant and was seen as a merciless angel of death. The man screamed at him, asking what he had done for them to deserve such cruelty. Lord of the kingdom of Triton, this monster was Archduke Kieran, who with his cruelty plagued the empire. In tears, the man who embraced his son cried out and questioned the murderer, claiming his immense loyalty to the emperor. With his habitual coldness, Kieran approached the man who was terrified. The cruel man denied having any knowledge of the desperate Archduke's words, revealing that the emperor had ordered his annihilation. With a cruel expression and an imperious gaze, Kieran held his sword and ordered the Archduke of Barton to simply give up. In complete despair and fury, the Archduke of Barton shouted that he was nothing but a pathetic lackey of the emperor, and that all of this was savagery. Containing his contempt, Kieran stared at the man who remained silent for a second. The Archduke of Barton went back to raging against Kieran, but was quickly killed by him. The man's body fell heavily to the ground. Cruelly, Kieran stared at his most recent victim, saying that he should at least have met his end with dignity. Kieran entered one of the rooms where he knew Barton kept his most valuable possessions. Entering the hall, Kieran saw a collection of peculiar objects. A true cabinet of curiosities with animal skins, skulls, statues, old chests, among other peculiar artifacts. Such a fact led Kieran to question how the Archduke of Barton was able to say that he was going to hell, when clearly he himself would not even go to heaven. A noise coming from one of the corners of the room caught Kieran's attention. Curious, he walked up to a monument that was covered by a long, heavy red cloth. Kieran pulled the cloth that covered the monument, revealing a beautiful pair of curious eyes and strands of pink hair. He stopped, as if out of breath, and his eyes fixed on what was in front of him. A mermaid with long pink hair, blue eyes, and shimmering scales stood before Kieran, who had removed the cloth that concealed her. She stared at him with her deep blue eyes as if desperately pleading for help. Suddenly, a servant called for Kieran, interrupting his thoughts. Ordering him to be quiet, Kieran affirmed that he had already decimated most of the castle's inhabitants. Stuttering in shock, the young man realized the presence of the mermaid. The young woman, with her beautiful and exotic appearance, curiously stared at the two men through the glass. Kieran pondered and told him that he was aware of the Archduke of Barton's peculiar collection of rarities, but he confessed that he never imagined the noble would be capable of capturing a legendary creature like a mermaid. Worried, the blonde-haired man said that the problem was not the Archduke's collection. The young man then reminded Kieran about the legend. According to it, whoever harms a mermaid ends up dying afterwards, and that perhaps was the reason why the Archduke died. Dryly, Kieran replied that the Archduke died because he was plotting a rebellion against the Empire, not because of a fish. A little impatient, the beautiful mermaid gave a small tap against the glass while continuing to stare at the two men. Small bubbles came from her mouth as if she were trying to pronounce words until they formed help. While the blonde man and Kieran debated about taking all the palace's belongings, which belonged to His Majesty, the mermaid's fragile and wounded hands touched the glass, not understanding why those men ignored her. The mermaid anxiously watched as the two men argued about taking her too, and Kieran ordered that the other rooms also be searched. Attentive to the dialogue, but unable to properly communicate with them, she began to worry. The two continued talking until they were interrupted by a loud noise. Kieran, slightly irritated, looked toward the noise and the aquarium. The mermaid struggles violently, her wounded arms crashing against the glass, as if urgently seeking a way to escape her confinement. With a half smile on his lips, Kieran seems curious about the mermaid's actions, while the blonde man, terrified, wonders if she is trying to attack them. The beautiful creature, still injured, strikes her hands against the glass of the aquarium with a desolate look. Kieran, with a wide smile, assumes that she might be doing this because she would like to rejoin her former master, and the young man asks if he is going to kill her. Cruelly, Kieran recalls that the mission was to eliminate everyone in the castle by order of the emperor. He says this while holding his sword, ready to strike. The man shouts, trying to dissuade his sovereign from the idea, while the blade dangerously approaches the glass. But Kieran ignores him and strikes the aquarium, frightening both the mermaid and the other man. The glass begins to crack. The cracks spread across the walls of the aquarium, while the mermaid curiously watches, shielding her face with her badly wounded hands. The cracked glass can no longer hold and ends up giving way, causing a great explosion of water. Immediately after, the mermaid is thrown toward Kieran. She grabs tightly onto his clothes and falls into Kieran's arms, who was not expecting it. Water pours from the immense aquarium that is now in pieces. After the entire scene, Kieran and the beautiful mermaid fall to the ground, surprised. The two stare at each other for a few seconds, breathless. As he caresses the mermaid's face, gently touching her cheek, he realizes he had not noticed before how her blue eyes reminded him of something. She holds his hand, smiles radiantly, and her gaze seems to gleam with joy. Surprised by her gesture, Kieran looks at the mermaid, speechless. A room lit by a radiant light that streams through a window in shades of blue. And this is the beginning of the story between a mystical mermaid and her one and only true human, her great love, her Serenhide. The mermaid stared at the man with her deep blue eyes while drops dripped from her face and hair. She seemed to examine Kieran as he confidently, though a bit curiously, stared back at her. Suddenly, Kieran grabbed the mermaid's wrist while calling for Ian. He ordered Ian to take her, place her in a tank, and bring her back to him later. Our protagonist, with her expressive blue eyes, looked on, seeming not to fully understand. Kieran, at another moment, in a dark room lit only by moonlight, appeared lost in thought. Observing the place, he remembered that this was the second time he had been there. He contemplated a statue in front of him, as if accessing a memory of the past. In the memory, there was Kieran, clearly younger, beside a man with an authoritative posture and elegant clothing. The man, who was the king, watched a subject surrender and swear the loyalty of the Barton kingdom to the empire. The two looked indifferently at the man prostrated on the ground. Meanwhile, the subject begged for clemency from his majesty. The king then called upon Kieran and asked him to observe carefully. Angered by the memory, Kieran pushed the statue, which crashed to the ground, shattering into many pieces. Murmuring that the place remained unpleasant as always, Kieran turned to leave. Then, his gaze shifted to Ian, who called to him as he entered the room. Ian informed Kieran that he was bringing the mermaid, though he had ordered her to be placed in a tank. Things had become complicated. The man's servants firmly held the delicate woman by the arms, who walked with difficulty in a white dress made of rags, revealing human legs beneath it. Kieran let out a muffled laugh upon realizing that the mermaid had transformed into a human. Ian revealed that after the water dried from the creature's skin, she changed her form. Holding the woman's face, Kieran confirmed that this fish could indeed pass as a true human. Analyzing the mermaid, Kieran stated that the Archduke had truly been hiding a very valuable artifact in that castle. The mermaid seemed uncomfortable as Kieran observed and examined her face. On the ground, she appeared not to have the strength to stand, and so her legs trembled. Observing the mermaid's wounded body, Kieran grew irritated. Kieran grew angry with Ian, scolding him for having treated his battle trophy so rudely and harshly. But Ian explained that he was not the one who had harmed the mermaid. Through the mermaid's gaze, we see Ian affirming that she was already injured, suspecting that the late Archduke was responsible for the wounds. The mermaid began to tremble as she recalled painful memories. The image of the Archduke of Barton furious, shouting at the mermaid while whipping her, saying that according to legends, mermaids should cry pearls. Cracking a whip in his hands, he questions the mystical creature as to why she does not cry. Blinded by his own greed, he orders her to give him the pearls. Ignoring her suffering, the man continued whipping the woman more and more. Interrupting our protagonist's thoughts, Kieran's voice calls her. He holds her chin, bringing her closer, while asking if she is listening. His eyes stare fixedly into the mermaid's eyes. Mentally, he questions what kind of thing the Archduke of Barton had been involved in. Kieran, with a serious and thoughtful expression, observes her. He gently caresses her face while thinking how much those eyes please him. His amber, calculating eyes watch her while, frightened, she tries to say something, but the sound comes out as an incomprehensible murmur. Attentive to the scene, Ian steps in front of Kieran, trying to protect him. Kieran hears his soldiers moving, ready to attack the mermaid, and annoyed, he asks them what they are doing. Worried, Ian explains that there is a rumor saying that a mermaid's voice is capable of stealing souls, and that is why they are concerned. Impatient and irritated with such legends and rumors, Kieran dismisses him. Meanwhile, our protagonist tries once again to speak to Kieran, and with difficulty says the word I. With quick reflexes, the man's knights move to attack, but Kieran calmly steps into the situation and stops them. The two men struggle to understand what the mermaid is trying to say. With great difficulty, she murmurs, "Hungry," as she approaches Kieran, speaking again this time a full sentence. "I am hungry." Still in the same position, the young woman begs for food with her blue eyes. In the blue hall, Kieran, Ian, and the mermaid are silent. Without averting his gaze from the mythological being, he asks the other man if he also heard what she said, and frightened, the blonde man agrees. Unexpectedly, Kieran begins to laugh hysterically. The mermaid watches him closely. The anxious guards ask each other if their master is truly laughing. Once again, holding the delicate creature's face firmly, the man states he cannot believe he has found such an interesting trophy. The imposing man with the somber gaze kneels in front of the mermaid while speaking to Ian, suggesting taking the creature creature back to the Empire with them. As the protagonist caresses her face, uncertain of her future, the mermaid stares back at him. An Imperial ship quickly crosses the blue ocean. In light garments, Kieran gives the orders for his subordinates to raise the aft sails. Quickly, they pull the ropes. The ship's sails swell with the winds, highlighting its grandeur. Just behind his master, Ian yawns and comments on how long the journey has been. Not only had they subdued the nomads who terrorized a border, but they had also repressed a rebellion and had been away from Triton's castle for almost 6 months. Kieran rudely interrupts Ian and tells him to speak at once what he intends to say. Distressed, Ian apologizes to his master. As the ship crosses the waters, the blonde man suggests to Kieran that they release the mermaid into the Berceuse Ocean, for his argument is that the Emperor had ordered them not to take prisoners. However, the man refuses the suggestion, affirming that technically she is a fish and not a human, claiming his intention is to keep her as an exhibition animal. Still shocked, Ian questions his master if she will be his pet. However, Kieran merely responds by asking what the mermaid would be doing. With a wicked smile on his face, he names the creature his little fish. Sitting, trembling, and hungry, the mermaid hugs her own body, not knowing her whereabouts. Confused, Kieran asks Ian what was wrong with her, and the young man replies that the creature seemed bothered by clothes, always tearing them. Noticing her pale color, the man questions his subordinate if he had not fed her before setting sail, as he had been ordered. The blonde man responds that he had tried to feed her with some fish left in the palace. He explains that there had been some buckets with raw fish near the aquarium, and that he tried to feed her with them. Kieran kneels in front of the young woman, assuming that she would not eat soup or fried foods. With a look of concern, the mermaid stares at the man before her. Holding her chin, Kieran lowers himself a little more and approaches the creature. With his thumb, the man begins to open her mouth. Forcing her to open it wider, he notes something peculiar. Kieran tells Ian that despite her sickly appearance, the inside of her mouth is warm, and the mermaid, with difficulty, pronounces the word water. Insistently, the servant questions his master about releasing her into the ocean, and is interrupted by him, who says seriously, water. Kieran scolds his servant for wasting time asking him questions, and the latter responds that they had tried to give the mermaid water to drink, which she had previously refused. Abruptly, Kieran takes the water jug from Ian's hands, and then he reminds him that she is a mermaid and has other needs besides drinking. Soon, Kieran pours the water over the head of the mystical creature, who is kneeling on the floor before him. In silence, the two men watch the beautiful creature closely, with water dripping from her face and pink hair. Her features regain color again, her eyes shine brighter, and the mermaid finally seems to regain her life. Intrigued, Kieran asks the mermaid if she feels better. The delicate young woman, unable to pronounce many words, looks curiously at the black-haired man. Then he turns and orders an officer to keep an eye on her, starting to leave the room, but the young woman extends her arm toward him, trying to say something. Whispering, she asks him not to go. Walking toward the exit of the room, Kieran barely hears a nearly inaudible voice asking him to wait. Suddenly, the mermaid grabs his leg firmly. Desolate on the floor, the young woman in her white dress holds the man's leg with the little strength that remains in her fragile body. Coldly, Kieran stares at the mermaid, telling her he does not wish to accept such a needy animal. All at once, the mermaid reaches his chest, making him bend down. Then, quickly, with a gentle gesture, she touches his face, without him really understanding what is happening. He asks the creature what she is doing, and she, with her delicate wounded hands touching his face, begins trying to speak again. With a smile full of affection, the mermaid looks at the man and asks him not to go. In a final gesture, she delicately touches Kieran's lips. However, something unexpected happens, and the beautiful creature faints, probably from exhaustion. More unexpected than this is that Kieran holds her in his arms while she breathes softly. Stunned, he watches the mermaid, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Under the moonlight, two mermaids talk while sitting on a rock in the middle of an unknown ocean. Both figures seem to tell someone to get rid of him before falling asleep, for in this way, when they meet their future Sarenhide, they will immediately know. Under waters as blue as her eyes, our protagonist mermaid wonders if one day she will find this someone. Contemplating the imposing figure of Kieran through the glass of the aquarium, the mermaid in her thoughts realized that even now she did not understand what had been said in the past. Observing Kieran, in her mind comes the thought that all she wants most is to simply find her future Sarenhide, who will live in her memory. If she manages to find her destined mate, she will be able to have her child. However, the stream of joyful thoughts is interrupted by the memory of the violence she suffered in the past, when greedy men captured the mermaid. Wounded and terrified, the mermaid, trapped in a fishing net, stared at her captors. Amid the screams and fire torches of unknown and dangerous figures, the delicate hands of the mystical creature. With a start, the mermaid awakens with her wide, frightened eyes. She looks down and finds herself partially immersed immersed in a tub of salt water, with her tail completely transformed, human again only from the waist up. Holding the water in her hands, which were no longer wounded, she realizes that the water is seawater, raising hopes of having returned to the ocean. However, she realizes she is not alone in the room, and Kieran's voice interrupts her stream of thoughts, stating that he had noticed her tail had returned. She realizes he is the same human from before. The protagonist happily swishes her tail, wishing to ask if he had gathered all that water for her, but inwardly she realizes she would not know how to say that in human language. His footsteps fill the room. Kieran leans toward her, asking if she is feeling better, and affirms that having Ian fetch so much seawater was worth it. He touches her forehead gently. The mysterious man, who at this moment does not seem so cruel, sits beside the mermaid and questions her if she is able to understand him. Lost in his thoughts, he remembers the legend that says, "Whoever harms a mermaid dies soon after," a curse of death. She watches him with her big blue eyes. In his thoughts, he considers her too foolish to be capable of casting such a curse. Curious, she gazes at her own reflection. In silence, he places his hand on his dagger while watching her play with the water. Suddenly, he thrusts the still-sheathed dagger into the mermaid's reflection, startling her immediately. The sweet creature stares at the man, not understanding anything at all. And then, as if applauding, the delicate young woman grabs the dagger with both hands. Impatient, he asks her, "What do you think you are doing?" She sweetly laughs at the situation. She does not know the danger that emanates from that object. In a memory of Kieran, we see a figure in a very old book, a male voice telling him that mermaids can be very beautiful but very dangerous. The male figure, holding the book of fables, along with a much younger Kieran, reveals to the boy that they seduce men by singing and showing them illusions that drive them mad. Kieran admires him with his large amber eyes. The scene changes drastically to the man in Kieran's memories dying, gravely wounded. With a distressed look, Kieran awakens from his memories. The mermaid's delicate hands unsheath the dagger. She removes all the protection from the weapon, not understanding what mysterious object that was. Fascinated, she runs her fingers along the silver blade. In a serious tone, he commands the mermaid to drop the dagger. She stares at him without being able to understand. Once again, he repeats the command, and she, without obeying him, repeats the word as if unaware of its meaning. Abruptly, he pulls the dagger from her hands, causing cuts on her fingers. Distraught in her bathtub, she holds her hands, blowing on her cut fingers, and sighing, Kieran resigns himself to teaching her more words when they return. Soon after the incident, the man begins to leave the chambers. In her tub of seawater, the mermaid watches the man moving away, unable to communicate with him. Heading for the exit, Kieran walks with heavy steps. Distressed, the young woman extends her hand to him, wishing he would stay, wishing to learn to speak the human language. He opens the door without looking back, not seeing the despair of the beautiful creature. Then the door closes heavily. Already in his kingdom, Kieran and Ian ride through the city, and subjects bow before them. A curious one tries to spy on what was inside the carriage. The curious soldier asks Ian what was being carried, but without success, for the man says he cannot reveal, under orders of the commander. One of the soldiers observes the subjects and tells Ian that the population still seems very frightened by the latest events. Distressed, the soldier notices that the subjects seem to feel they are being subjugated and not celebrating the victorious return of the entourage. A rumor runs through the city that if you look directly into Kieran's eyes, you will burn until you turn to ashes. Sighing, Ian confesses that it was the late emperor who invented this rumor, for it was he who was responsible for creating this image of the Reaper that Kieran presents. Ian discreetly looks toward the carriage. With weary features, Ian says they are only rumors and that everything will soon be forgotten, so there is no reason to worry. Inside the carriage, there was a heap of cloth moving. Lifting the cloth that covered it, our curious protagonist peeks into the interior of the carriage with her beautiful blue eyes. In a golden hall, someone calls for a maid who is carrying a bucket full of fish. In a sumptuous corridor, two maids talk excitedly, the first asking where the second was going, and she replies that she had gone to the kitchen. With disdain, other maids talk about going to the kitchen at that hour of the afternoon, and if it was already time to feed her. The maid Anne holds a bucket full of fish and other animals to feed the creature, claiming that it is not such a bad task. The other maid, with disdain, gossips that when the other palace servants gather, they only talk about the novelty. Dismayed, Anne hears the maid saying that she is the emperor's mistress, and that she is not human at all, in addition to speaking legends that mermaids kill people with their voices. In another part of the palace, Anne approaches a huge door, struggling to push aside from her thoughts the terrible things the other women had said. Annoyed, Anne sighs and disbelieves the rumors mentioned, for if mermaids were so dangerous as to kill people just with their voices, she would already be dead. In her room, the mermaid is surprised to hear a knock at the door, and Anne, her maid, announces her arrival. Holding the bucket with the mermaid's meal, Anne enters the chambers, apologizing for the delay. She is greeted with happiness by a young young woman with long pink hair inside a large pool. Smiling sweetly, the beautiful mythological creature tries to pronounce the maid's name. Bending down to pick up the mermaid's meal, Anne tries to teach her to pronounce her name correctly. In vain. While our protagonist watches her, Anne, taking advantage of the situation, notes that the mermaid has learned very well other words, but some she seems not to have absorbed, and she smiles sweetly. As she hands the bucket of fish to the creature, Anne tells her that she brought a squid as a gift. Struggling to pronounce thank you, the mermaid thanks the maid for the special food. Placing her hands together in front of her face, Anne is happy that she remembered how to thank properly. The door slowly opens and footsteps are heard in the corridor. The mermaid freezes upon hearing that sound, and Anne watches her closely. Calling her closer, Anne approaches, noticing that the mermaid's features have completely changed and that she even dropped her food on the floor. Anne asks the mermaid if there was someone she would like to see. Digging into her memory, the maid recalls that in the first months, Count Ian often visited the mermaid, so it must be him whom the beautiful young woman was thinking about. Then Anne asks the young woman if it was Ian she wanted to see, but she does not seem to know who the maid was talking about. The image of Kieran passing through the door returns to the mystical creature's memory, who also recalls the strong back of the protagonist, believing that Kieran's name was Ian. Anne notices that she was blushing shyly while absorbed in her thoughts. The afternoon light illuminates the room where there is a beautiful Roman statue. Seeming to understand what the maid had said, the mermaid nods and says very eagerly that it was Ian she wanted to see. Confused, the maid asks how the beautiful woman likes him so much, even though he no longer visits her as often. With a caring gesture, Anne asks the mermaid to turn around so she can braid her long hair, but the young woman is lost in her thoughts, thinking about Kieran. Recalling past moments with Kieran, the mermaid remembers him touching her head and caressing her hair, considering him her Serenhide. While Anne brushes her pink hair with an adorned brush, the mermaid remembers the words of her sisters, who told her that she would surely know when she found her true mate. In her memories, she recalls Kieran extending his hand to her, sitting while her maid braids her hair. The young woman justifies in her thoughts her patience in waiting for Kieran. After finishing the braids, Anne leaves the chambers to fetch something to place in the delicate young woman's hair. The mermaid makes bubbles in the water, still remembering her sisters who told her she would wait a long time to find her Serenhide. Suddenly, she hears a door being unlocked. Turning around, she thinks Anne has returned, but she comes face to face with Kieran, asking her who she was looking for. Surprised by the man, she watches him as he leans closer. With coldness in his words, he points out that she looks ridiculous and is still mute, then asks why her tail has disappeared again. The mermaid pronounces tail, and the man touches her knees, indicating where the tail should be. She also cannot understand why she has not been able to transform back into a mermaid since she arrived there. Holding both hands with a little water from the tank, the beautiful woman wonders if the reason for it was the water, which is different from ocean water, calling him Ian. However, Kieran is unable to understand what she was trying to say. Trying more desperately, she shows him the water in her hands and anxiously says Ian's name and the word water together. Intrigued, Kieran watches the mermaid and repeats the name Ian. Suddenly, Anne returns to the chambers, pushing Kieran away from the mermaid. Shouting, the maid asks who that mysterious man is and who he thinks he is to enter a young woman's room alone. The maid, still shouting, orders him to leave the room immediately, while Kieran holds his head with his hand, stunned by the blow Anne had struck him. Standing up, the imposing man asks if the servant really ordered him to leave, and the two women stare at him, embraced and frightened. With a wicked smile on his face, he asks Anne if she is sure of what she is asking him. The mermaid tries to calm the maid while she shouts at Kieran, confirming her request for him to leave. Regaining her senses, Anne realizes that the man she was arguing with was His Majesty Kieran. He asks the servant if they had created new rules while he was away, and if now he needs permission to visit his royal chambers. Anne begs forgiveness, bowing on the floor before Kieran, telling him that she had recently started working at the palace and was not yet accustomed to him. Trembling and very afraid, the maid says that she deserves to die. Kieran touches the sword that was sheathed, acknowledging that Anne works well. However, Kieran is still a cruel man, telling the desperate young woman that she should know well the people she serves. The mermaid and her maid stare at Kieran, completely perplexed. Suddenly, in a desperate gesture, the mermaid jumps out of the tank and leaps onto Kieran, calling him by the name Ian. Irritated, he glares at the mermaid. Still desperate, the beautiful young woman continues to say the name Ian, trying to dissuade him from hurting the maid. Not fully understanding human language, the mermaid repeats, "Thank you," a few times, and Kieran laughs with slight malice, telling her to ask him for a favor, not thank you. The mermaid, with Kieran's hand on her face, repeats his words. He realizes that the young woman had learned new words and, as he grips her arm, notices she has gained weight since living in the palace. Bringing her closer, he praises her, saying that now she even knows how to jump into his arms, and calls her his little fish. He stares at her with his amber eyes and says that since she managed to stop his blade, he would do as she wished. and asks the mermaid directly if he should kill the maid. With her big blue eyes, the mystical creature looks at him, asking what kill is. In tears, the maid pleads for mercy, begging for her life to be spared. Without letting go of the mermaid, Kieran turns to the maid, claiming that she herself had said earlier that she deserved to die, while the young woman begs forgiveness and says she would do anything. Whispering close to the mermaid's face, he asks her to try to beg him to spare the maid's life, confiding that if she asked, he would not harm Anne. Kieran holds the mermaid's arm, imploring her to ask him to spare the maid's life. Our protagonist whispers, repeating the phrase he uttered. Now, a little more confident, she asks him to spare Anne's life. Surprised, Kieran holds the pink-haired young woman closer to him. He ponders and smacks his lips. Abruptly pushing the mermaid aside, he addresses the maid, stating that he is a man of his word and would not harm her. Hurriedly, Anne catches the mermaid before she falls to the ground. Holding his adorned sword, Kieran orders the mystical creature to learn to speak better, and that Anne is tasked with this duty, and that the name Ian is not to be repeated. Still very fearful, the maid thanks His Majesty, and Kieran leaves the chambers. The distressed protagonist watches the door close with a dull thud. In another bluish room, lit by a candelabrum with faint lights, Ian announces himself to Kieran, asking what he would like to say. The blonde man bows slightly and says that he heard about the maid being insubordinate, apologizing to his master, who only replies that words travel fast. Holding a vial with a mysterious liquid, Kieran tells Ian that the mermaid asked him to spare the maid's life, which leaves the young man confused. Then the black-haired man patiently repeats the sentence and adds that the mermaid asked him for a favor. Remembering the murdered Archduke, Kieran tells Ian how irritating it is to see people resorting to the depths of despair to try to survive. However, there was something about that little fish since the first time he laid eyes on her. A bit confused by the dialogue, Ian calls Kieran, who only dismisses him and asks him to leave the hall. Worried about his master, Ian warns him that he has been taking much more of that medication, and that he is concerned for his master's health. Annoyed, Kieran asks his servant if he prefers then that he goes sleepless at night, and sends him away again. Ian acquiesces and leaves. In a large bluish hall, lit by moonlight, Kieran is lying on a divan. The black-haired man finally falls asleep after drinking the medicine from that vial. In his troubled dreams, he hears his own name being called several times by a weak and somber voice. The calls are abruptly cut off by the Archduke's words, who called the man the Emperor's dog, right before being cruelly murdered, and also by the maid's pleas not to die. A new, terrifying vision. Apparently, Kieran's father, in a deplorable state, calls for his son in the midst of darkness. Terrified, Kieran crawls away from the crawling figure of his dead father, who begs him for help. A very delicate feminine mouth appears in the darkness. The mermaid appears again in his thoughts, asking him to spare the maid's life. This time, Kieran is sitting, with the figure of the mermaid approaching him, instead of the terrifying figure of his father. He wakes up, placing his hand on his head, his amber eyes not revealing his intentions. Frustrated, he mutters to himself that he is already fed up with this situation. A few days pass, and we see a beautiful garden, bathed in sunlight, displaying various different plants. On a marble floor, two very unsteady feet tread. The mermaid, in a beautiful royal dress, struggles to learn to walk in a gorgeous golden hall. Falling into Anne's arms, the young woman takes a breath, and the maid celebrates her victory for having walked 2 steps more than yesterday. She happily listens to her maid say that soon they will be able to go to the outer area of the palace. Impressed and smiling, the mystical creature comments that it was incredible. Anne accompanies the mermaid, who wants to practice more steps in the golden hall. With a distant yet affectionate look, Anne tells her about her brothers and sisters. The maid tells her that her family is quite large, with her being the oldest sister and having 3 younger siblings, 2 boys and 1 girl. Confused, the young pink-haired woman asks what siblings are, so Anne tells her story. How they were very poor, the parents always worked, and she took care of the siblings. Remembering her family, Anne confesses that they would not listen to a word she said, and sometimes that was very frustrating. But despite everything, they were still her family and she loved them. Speaking from the heart to the mermaid, Anne tells her that if she had not stopped Kieran, she would never see them again. The maid sweetly thanks the beautiful young woman, unable to hide her tears of gratitude. The calm moment between the two is suddenly cut by the screams of a very elegant woman in a wine-colored dress, wanting to extend her stay in the palace, being driven away by other servants. Anne tries to move the young woman away from the commotion, hiding her behind a marble column, while the palace servants try to calm the woman down. A maid, who seemed to be of high rank, informs the agitated woman that she should leave the palace as soon as possible. Noticing the older maid, Anne realizes that the woman must have been summoned by His Majesty to his chambers the night before, but does not quite understand the reason. Then the maid tells the mermaid that the woman must have spent the night with Kieran, and the pink-haired young woman seems to finally understand. Recalling once again her sisters, the mermaid remembers them them, saying that she should spend the night with her Sarenhide to have a child. Still absorbed in the palace commotion, the maid confirms the truth of the rumors. Kieran received women in his chambers and dismissed them in the morning, without exceptions. In a hurry, Anne grabs the young woman by the arm to move her away from the confusion, but the delicate creature seems to try to say something that is not heard. The two move away from the commotion caused by the woman in the red dress in the golden hall. In her thoughts, the mermaid very much wanted to speak with the woman to know what it would be like to spend the night with a Sarenhide. Returning to a distant past, there is a desolate landscape with torn flags and leafless trees in a pale sunset. With a harsh voice, a man orders Kieran to kill a surrendered soldier before him, in a landscape apparently devastated by war. A very young Kieran trembles in fear as he holds a sword, and the same figure we saw earlier is present by his side. The man orders him vehemently to kill the man before them, but the young boy pleads, prolonging the dialogue. The older figure stares at the young boy with very harsh eyes, and it is revealed that the soldier before them was Kieran's teacher, who cries out, protesting not to be killed. In tears, Kieran hears the older man tell him that he was no longer his teacher, and then he continues, saying that man was a traitor who tried to kill them by selling information to the enemies. Crying and trembling, Kieran tries to negotiate with the older man, and it is revealed to us that he was his brother, the Emperor, and not his father. The Emperor strikes his younger brother with a strong slap to his face, questioning when his younger brother would become a proper member of the imperial family. Shaken after the slap, Kieran touches his reddened face, while tears stream down his eyes. Voices echo through the scene, reminding the young boy that he had received a command from the Emperor. His older brother's hand points, and with harsh words he tells him to kill that man, or end his own life. The Emperor, urging Kieran to commit a nefarious act, tells the boy that this is the moment to prove himself before him, and that he had no other choice. Trembling, unable to hold back his tears, Kieran asks his former teacher if those accusations were true, wielding a long silver blade. Recalling recent memories, the young man reminds his master that he had taught him many things for years, questioning if he would throw it all away so easily. The captured teacher remains silent. In a desperate act, the young black-haired boy orders his former tutor to deny the accusations, and that he would do his best from then on. Gravely wounded, the teacher looks at his student and tells him to follow the orders of his brother, the Emperor, for as a wrongdoer, he awaited imperial punishment. In a flashback, Kieran recalls the words of his teacher, who taught that the sword is the staff of a ruler, to be used to guide his subjects and not for obsessive slaughter. The young boy hears in his memories the voice of his teacher telling him that a sword must always be used for the good of his subjects. Sobbing in despair, Kieran's amber eyes tremble before an impossible choice. Realizing that he must survive at all costs, Kieran annihilates his first victim with a precise strike, under a sunset as golden as his eyes. He wakes suddenly in his chambers, haunted by the memory of the past. The sovereign rises quickly from his divan. In his royal chambers, sitting by the window, he hears the maid calling the mermaid in the distance. And he sees the scene happening, the young woman happily running barefoot in the palace garden with Anne trying to reach her. Amused by all this, the mermaid laughs distractedly. In silence, Kieran observes the two, and his expression is not able to reveal his intentions. On a supposedly calm night, we see the imperial palace, and inside it, a glass vial shatters into many pieces as it falls to the floor. Kieran, apparently shaken for some reason, is sitting on his divan with his hand on his face. He raises his head and lets out a deep sigh, realizing there is no way out. Red hands, covered in blood, grab one of his legs while he can only think that the medicines are not working. Desolate from the haunting memory of his deceased brother crawling toward him, Kieran almost loses hope, his gaze fixed on nothing. Suddenly, something catches Kieran's attention, distracting him from his dark thoughts. His mind goes to the memory of the mermaid with a beautiful smile, running with her human legs in the palace garden. Kieran looks at the memory of the mermaid, laughing at the idea of having his soul stolen by her. However, with a sigh, he reveals that he would even prefer that to happen. Bursting into the chambers, Ian calls for his master, who is sitting motionless. The blonde-haired man, worried about Kieran, asks him what happened, to which he replies that Ian arrived at the right moment. With a grim expression, Kieran orders Ian to bring her at once. A knight in metallic armor allows the mermaid to clumsily hold on to his arm, the sound of metal filling the corridor. Still not mastering the way of walking as a human, the mermaid lets go of the soldier, nearly falling. The soldier asks her, "What is the problem?" And the beautiful creature asks him to wait a little. The noble soldier blushes slightly, but he insists that she must be taken immediately to the sovereign. In a luxurious hall, the moonlight passes through the windows, revealing chic and richly adorned furniture. The mermaid hears the soldier instruct her to enter alone and pass through the drawing drawing room. With eyes shining, she listens to the soldier's instructions to reach His Majesty's chambers. Upon arriving in the Great Hall, the mermaid observes the imposing figure of the sovereign, who says that she took quite a while. Kieran, wearing a half-open white shirt, watches the mermaid seriously. Excited to see him, she leans on one of the pieces of furniture, and he notices that she has been practicing walking. The mermaid, unable to contain her happiness, tells him that she walked a lot. The man sits on his bed. Then, in a serious manner, he asks her to walk over to him. Impulsive, the mermaid composes herself to walk toward him. Her feet tremble on the cold floor. Unable to walk properly, the mermaid falls to the floor in front of Kieran, who watches her from a distance. He laughs scornfully and orders her to keep coming closer. The young woman becomes annoyed, puffing her cheeks, but she is determined to reach the man. Supported by her hands, the mermaid trembles, regaining strength to rise again. She finally manages to stand again, still a little clumsy. The beautiful woman walks toward the sovereign. The lovely young woman's feet tremble as she approaches him, already very close. Radiant, she manages to say that she did it. Not realizing that he is still not satisfied, she approaches the sovereign even more. Abruptly, he pulls her by the arm. After throwing the fragile woman onto the bed, Kieran positions himself over her, saying that she should have made it all the way there. Holding her left foot, he asks where she had walked for her feet to be so warm. She, stunned by what had happened, does not seem to understand. Where is he going with this? Holding her trembling leg, he asks her if all that is too much for her. Embarrassed by the sudden change in attitude, the mermaid nods, saying she is fine. Kieran dominates the fragile woman's body, then asks the mermaid to sing for him. She watches the black-haired man as he caresses her lips. Moving closer in an intimidating way, he looks into her eyes and orders her to sing for him. Right at that moment, in a distant past, sitting on a beach, a young Kieran watches the ocean. The boy is interrupted by a servant who tells him it is cold that day. While Kieran looks at the ocean, his servant asks him what he is thinking, since he has seen the boy watching the ocean all day. Admiring the sunset, Kieran tells him that he finds the ocean so beautiful that he wanted it for himself, even if just once. In his bed, he caresses the mermaid's face, who stares at him astonished, with her expressive blue eyes. Then, the sovereign asks her what she is waiting for. Placing his thumb on her mouth, he orders the beautiful woman to sing for him, but she, confused, tells him she does not know what sing is. Irritated, he asks the mermaid how she could not know what singing is. Frightened, she watches the man hovering above her, who questions whether she does not understand the word or if no one taught her out of fear that her song would steal souls. In a flashback, Kieran recalls the servants, claiming they swore loyalty. But as time passes, they do not hide their true intentions. They think that mermaid is a monster who will inevitably hurt them. The sovereign laughs sarcastically, commenting that the innocence of the beautiful creature makes him understand why she was kept captive. He says the word Berceuse. He looks at the mermaid and repeats, Berceuse. To his surprise, the mermaid understands, for it is a word from her ancient language. She confirms by nodding, and Kieran understands that mermaids speak the ancient tongue and that the word used means lullaby. In a sudden gesture, they change positions on the bed. The black-haired man lies down beside the mermaid and asks her once again to sing for him. Right at that moment, staring at the beautiful young woman with his amber eyes, he asks her what she is waiting for. Embarrassed, she looks at Kieran, and he orders her to proceed. The young woman begins to murmur a melody as he gently touches her lips. The melody of the sea fills the room, and the man feels it less like music and more like a sweet hymn. A very young Kieran walks toward the waves crashing in the ocean. The mermaid's song transports him to his memories, where we see waves breaking in a turbulent ocean. A voice from the past asks what he was thinking, and he simply replies that he was contemplating the ocean, wishing to possess it, when in truth his desire was to drown. At that moment, Kieran's greatest wish was to know the peace of slowly drowning in those deep waters, beneath the waves. Contemplating the fading light, the man wished for the waves to carry him to his death. A very blue eye illuminates the scene. The waters, once dark, become crystalline, and she, in all her beauty, holds Kieran in her arms. Finally, he pauses for a moment and understands why he brought the mermaid there. As much as he did not believe in the old legends, lying face to face with the mermaid, he tells her that he truly wished for her to seduce and kill him, and she is left not understanding. Unexpectedly, he pulls her close and kisses her intensely. Almost out of breath, the mermaid pulls away and asks the man what that was, but he only replies for her to continue. Staring at her with a determined look, he orders her to keep singing the lullaby, and not to stop. She continues to sing the melody, and Kieran says that he wants to swallow her whole. Oh, Christ in heaven. The mermaid continues singing while kissing the sovereign. Their lips touch at the same time as she murmurs the melody. The mermaid's singing fills the walls of Kieran's great chamber. The next morning, the mermaid suddenly wakes in a bed that is not her water tank, and Kieran sleeps peacefully at her side. She looks around, not fully understanding where she was. The young woman turns and looks at Kieran, deeply asleep, relieved that her song helped the man sleep. Embarrassed, she remembers the kiss, not understanding what that gentle gesture was, and remembering how much her heart raced. She extends her hand to touch his face. Kieran immediately wakes upon feeling the young woman's thumb on his lips. Startled, she withdraws at once. He abruptly changes his posture. Harshly, he begins to strangle the young woman, who is left without reaction. She coughs continuously, unable to utter words, while Kieran's strong hands grip her neck. He, astonished, realizes what he was doing. In silence, he stops suffocating her and stares at the young woman before him. Bringing air back to her lungs, she cries out that she is being hurt and begs him to let her go. Kieran is completely paralyzed. He releases her delicate neck and she coughs heavily, over and over. Suddenly, changing moods, the black-haired man looks out the window and realizes that the sun has risen and that he had a night without dreams. Still slightly breathless, the mermaid looks at him, completely disoriented. He approaches again and asks her if that was how she intended to steal his soul. Contemplating the beauty of the young mermaid, he tells her that if that is the case, he sees the value that is in her. He stays silent for a few seconds. Looking at the young woman with a smile, he names her Melusine and says that from now on, that is how she will be called. Anne rises abruptly from the armchair to lovingly receive the mermaid, who runs into her arms. The maid checks every detail of the young woman to see if everything is well and if there are no injuries, and tells her that she prepared a bath for her. Then, Anne notices that the ribbon of the mermaid's dress was not untied. Curious but also concerned, the servant asks if something happened in His Majesty's chambers last night. Innocently, Melusine repeats the words spoken by Anne, and finally realizes. She approaches the brown-haired young woman and gives her a kiss on the cheek. Startled, Anne scolds the young woman, telling her she should not do that, recalling the previous night, which was quite lively. The mermaid Melusine tells Anne what happened. The maid, very anxious, asks if His Majesty and she kissed. Still incredulous, the servant teaches the young woman the word kiss, explaining that now she can no longer kiss anyone else. Continuing her explanation, Anne tells Melusine that what she and Kieran did was very special, and that kisses are reserved for people she truly likes. With her heart already very much in love with Kieran, the pink-haired woman reflects on her maid's words. She remembers the touch of Kieran's hand on her face, caressing her in his bed. Trying to take in the whole situation, the young mermaid questions if Kieran considers her his partner. After the morning incident, she stares at the man who is over her. He, surprised, feels her hand touching his face. Looking into his amber eyes, she wonders if that was why he gave her a name. She whispers her new name, touching her lips, perhaps trying to relive the sensations of the previous night. Returning from her thoughts, she tells her maid that her name is Melusine. Now, with more intensity, she says, "My name is Melusine," in her heart, with the conviction that she has found her Serenhide. In Kieran's chambers, the afternoon light strikes the windows. A pile of papers is thrown on top of a table. Ian, greatly surprised, asks his master if he slept. Kieran, seated in a sumptuous armchair, flips through some papers and confirms that he had a deep and restorative sleep. And, despite the relief, Ian expresses curiosity about how he managed it. His master sighs and replies that he is not sure how he managed, hiding the events of the previous night. In his thoughts, Ian recalls that Kieran has not slept well for 5 years, since the death of the former emperor, even with medication, and then asks if the mermaid helped him in some way. Ian insists, asking his sovereign if he will take the mermaid to his chambers again that night, but Kieran interrupts him, questioning the reason for the question. Changing the subject, Kieran asks Ian if he researched what Marquis Hethnal has been doing lately, and apologizing, the blonde man fetches a report. According to the servant, the number of soldiers of the Marquis in his territory doubled since last year, and Ian estimates it will triple by the end of this year. Excluding the nobles who were close to the deceased emperor, all the other aristocrats of the palace and the capital had been contacted by him. Even some had agreed to support him. With a Machiavellian smile, Kieran states that the situation seemed worse than before. Ian, worried, agrees with his master. The sovereign refuses the suggestion of sending someone to investigate the Marquis, stating that he will meet him in 2 months, but instructs that the noble be watched. Consenting to his master's orders, Ian leaves the sumptuous chambers. Before he goes, Kieran calls him by his full name and asks the blonde-haired man if he agrees with it. Ian, not understanding the sovereign's words, asks what he meant, and Kieran replies curtly that he knew what it was about. Raising his head, Kieran questions if Ian was sure he was ready to become a traitor alongside him. The two men stare at each other in silence. Kieran, imposing, reminds Ian of having told him that there was no need to join him in this rebellion, and he does not want him to face the consequences. Ian nods and replies that he only wants His Majesty to be prudent. Kieran tells him that he is his vice commander, not his vassal, but the blonde man denies it. Staring at his master, Ian tells him that Kieran's will is his will, and that he will stand by the sovereign until the end. With an evil smile, Kieran repeats his words, saying that it is a lovely sentiment and that he may leave the chambers. Turning to leave, Ian says that he understands and wishes that his sovereign rests well, and if he wants, he will send Melusine another night. Kieran's hands tremble discreetly. The sovereign recalls the mermaid, sitting in his luxurious armchair. He envisions Melusine's delicate mouth, and in his thoughts, he agrees that she has a very useful talent. He lights a cigar. Smoking, Kieran stares distractedly into nothing, his thoughts unreadable. Amid the smoke of the cigar, Kieran wonders how many times he needs to hear her sing before he falls into eternal sleep. A knock is heard at the door, and a soldier enters the room. Anne and Melusine are in the chambers, the maid placing a pearl necklace on the mermaid. Surprised by the soldier's request that he must take her to the sovereign, with much excitement, Anne tells her that she knew he would call her again, and the maid is very happy because she dressed Melusine with great care. Not fully understanding, Melusine asks herself what satisfied means. Happily, the young mermaid bids farewell to the maid, who tells her to stay safe, and then she is escorted by the soldier. The soldier, in a careful gesture for Melusine to take care, makes her notice how he has been much gentler than before. Anne rejoices greatly to see that Kieran is keeping her in the castle, even after the nights they spent together. She realizes this is the first time such a thing happens, confirming her suspicions that Kieran is truly interested in the young woman. Melusine timidly enters the sovereign's chambers. However, due to the darkness, she cannot see anything ahead of her, wondering if Kieran was really there. Stealthily, he approaches from behind. Calling her by name, Kieran firmly grabs Melusine by the waist, leaving the young woman speechless. Whispering very close to her face, he warns her that she is late. Touching the young woman's beautiful corseted dress, he asks what all those unnecessary layers are. Melusine, somewhat clumsy and trembling slightly, asks the sovereign for a moment, but he, still holding her, noticing her discomfort, offers help. Suddenly, he grabs her beautiful pearl necklace, tearing it apart. Several delicate, shining pearls scatter across the floor. He brings his face close to the beautiful young woman's neck, expressing disapproval of the perfume the maid applied, which was not her natural scent. He calls her even closer. With a lascivious look, he suggests that the two of them remove her clothes. The mermaid, shy, confesses not knowing how to remove her own clothing, while the man, with his hands roaming over her dress, indignantly asks how she could not know. Slightly irritated, he pulls the ribbon of the corset, telling her he would not like to raise a needy animal. The young woman's heavy garments fall to the ground. Melusine looks at her body, now only in the slip she wore beneath the dress. Bad-tempered, Kieran asks her if she suddenly decided to be shy. However, the protagonist was radiant with joy, for now she was much more comfortable, and she thanks the sovereign for his help. Disdainfully, he laughs and asks her if that is all it takes to make her smile, and since she is so grateful, he quickly pulls her by the waist. Sitting on his bed, he pulls the young woman to sit on his lap. With a hardened look, he stares at her and warns her that it is time for her to sing her berceuse. She, hesitant, stares back at him in silence. Soon after, a soft melody fills the royal chambers. It is as if the mermaid's song wandered through the windows, curtains, and walls, truly filling Kieran's chambers. A new day begins, and Melusine wakes, blinking her beautiful blue eyes. The young woman sits on the bed and realizes that the sun has already risen. Lying beside her in the bed, she wonders why he kissed her only once. Gently, Melusine caresses Kieran's hair. With a sweet smile, she looks at the sleeping man, thinking about when she will have her mermaid daughter, who will look exactly like her Sarenhide, since she has spent so many nights with him. Melusine deeply wishes to meet her future baby soon, as she gently strokes the face of the sleeping sovereign. The young woman kisses her beloved's forehead in a gesture of affection. Secretly, she thinks about how he has such adorable features. Suddenly, Kieran wakes, and the two exchange surprised looks. Startled, she pulls away, covering her mouth. Then, immediately after, he roughly grabs her arm. Looking at her with a certain malice, Kieran says he did not expect her to be so bold. He holds the young woman's hand, pulling her closer. And then, he raises his hand and caresses Melusine's pink hair. In a stern manner, he tells her not to cover her mouth and begins to kiss her. A full French kiss. They kiss intensely. Melusine and Kieran kiss passionately in the royal chambers. Suddenly, during the kiss, the young woman coughs, asking for air, and Kieran tells her to learn to breathe through her nose. The imposing man leans even closer to the young woman and tells her that this is why he has no doubts about why they have never done anything beyond kissing. Kieran, prolonging the moment, instructs Melusine to relax her lips, promising to teach her. A dazzling garden, filled with different types of flowers, is bathed in sunlight. In the beautiful palace garden, Melusine, surprised, hears Anne calling her from afar. The mermaid is called by her maid, who runs to put shoes on her, holding a pair in her hands. Melusine refuses to put the shoes on, telling Anne they are too tight, but the maid does not give up and keeps following the young woman. Our protagonist looks very elegant. In a beautiful blue dress with flowers, she runs across a lawn of beautiful yellow carnations. Admiring so many blooming flowers, Melusine pauses to contemplate them. Her maid had taught her the names of some, and those were freesias. Upon the yellow carnations, a beautiful butterfly lands, but the young mermaid had not learned what that curious animal was. The butterfly flies gently as Kieran walks through the garden. Then it lands exactly on his hand, and the mermaid looks at him, impressed. Kieran observes the small butterfly, while Melusine asks him what that moving blue flower is. He replies that it is not a flower, and teaches her the word butterfly. The man also tells her that butterfly is also called Psyche in the traditional mermaid tongue. The delicate butterfly frees itself from Kieran's hand and flies delicately through the garden. Melusine looks at the small animal in admiration, and Kieran remains standing by her side. The young pink-haired woman admires her love. She murmurs his name slowly as her hair blows in the wind. Sitting on the ground, she repeats the name of her beloved, and he lowers his gaze to her. Joining his fingers, he brings his hand close to the mermaid's face and gives her a sharp flick, scolding her because the pronunciation of his name is still wrong, and she needs to improve. Moving away, he warns that he will call her maid and that the young woman should not stay outside the palace for too long. Seeing him leave, Melusine quickly stands and tells Kieran that she would like to accompany him. He turns and tells her to do as she pleases. Unable to contain herself, Melusine radiates joy and nods. Then Anne runs after the young woman, who runs after her lover. Swords clash, emitting metallic sounds in a field at sunset. Impressed, our protagonist watches the scene, and Anne, right behind her, calls out saying she cannot just follow His Majesty to the training fields. Many soldiers brandish swords during the intense training. Anne confides to Melusine that if Kieran were not kind enough to allow them to stay, they both would have already been expelled, and that it is a dangerous place where the mermaid could get hurt. With a sigh, Melusine locates Kieran. Kieran arrives at the training field, mounted on his great black horse. Anne praises her sovereign and confides to the young woman that her father, a soldier at the castle, had told her Kieran was the only commander to take part in every training session. From atop his steed, Kieran gives the orders to end training for the day. Distracted, Anne says that if he had not died on the battlefield, he would be there. But it was too late, for Melusine was already running off to reach Kieran. The maid calls her by name, saying the young woman cannot simply follow the sovereign everywhere, but the mermaid cheerfully only repeats what he said. Do as you please. Back at the palace, there is a beautiful golden hall adorned from floor to ceiling. Melusine opens one of the doors of the great hall in search of Kieran, and Anne tells her not to do that, calling her to return to her chambers. The two stop at the entrance of a grand dining room, where Kieran is dining with the count. Anne warns the mermaid that the two gentlemen have important matters to discuss, and that they should not interrupt them. Still at the entrance of the room, Melusine cannot understand that the food served is not for her, despite Anne's efforts to explain. Bothered by the commotion, one of the butlers turns toward the entrance, excusing the young ladies. Anne kneels on the floor, apologizing for the intrusion and saying they will leave at once. But the butler, repeating Kieran's words, asks them to stop lingering at the entrance of the hall and come in at once. Radiating happiness, Melusine accepts, and Anne is left in shock. Drinking a fine wine, Kieran sits at the table. With immense difficulty, our protagonist tries to cut a roasted fish with golden cutlery. At the table, Kieran and Ian discuss imperial matters, while Melusine struggles unsuccessfully to cut the food on her plate. The sovereign questions the man at his side about a report explaining how the emperor bought a diamond mine. Sighing, Ian confesses that he does not understand why he keeps buying mines that have yielded no precious stones, and it seems more like Marquis Hethnal is inciting him to do so. The sovereign takes a sip of his wine, saying that the old man must be desperate to drain the palace's coffers, and meanwhile the metallic noises of Melusine's forks scratch the plates. While Kieran asks the servant when a new palace will be completed, the mermaid clumsily cuts a fish into pieces, producing sharp metallic sounds. Annoyed, Ian excuses himself for a moment to compose himself. While Kieran observes a paralyzed Melusine, Ian reveals that the new palace will be ready in the winter and only needs to be furnished, mentioning the noble's dissatisfaction with the number of workers hired to finish it on time. The sovereign says that this is the first time he is not under the aim of the late emperor, and that he will do as he pleases for as long as he can, and certainly the Marquis will benefit from it. Ian replies that this has led some nobles of more neutral houses to join them, but he is interrupted by the noise of Melusine's cutlery flying away from the table. Kieran laughs, saying it is a pity she cannot enjoy the dinner he invited her to. She innocently stares at the two men, holding only one utensil in her hands. To help her enjoy the moment, Kieran asks the maid to bring a plate with 2 raw fish. Turning to her, the sovereign asks if she doesn't want this today, and she, shaking the cutlery, tells him no. She asks him a question, ending the sentence with the name Kieran, which causes Ian great astonishment. While Kieran corrects her, telling her to emphasize the beginning of his name and not the end, Ian chokes in shock at hearing the young woman call the sovereign by his name. The young woman makes another attempt, almost getting it right, but he tells her to practice more. She hurriedly grabs one of the fish with both hands, after Kieran tells her to eat however she wants, since she already had trouble with the cutlery. The butler and Ian watch the scene in shock as the mermaid chews the raw fish. Kieran, intrigued by the scene, asks her if she is enjoying it. The young woman, very happy, tells him yes and thanks him for the meal. Apprehensive, Ian calls his sovereign, who asks him to continue and inquires how many noble houses agreed to join them. Ian, feeling very uncomfortable, pauses before continuing, questioning himself about what he is seeing before his eyes. Our smiling protagonist accepts the caresses of her beloved. In the training fields, many soldiers practice the art of combat while others rest. Melusine peeks through the entrance gate, while Ian asks His Majesty if he truly brought her there. Distracted after the training, Kieran asks who Ian is referring to, and after he replies, the sovereign tells him to let her stay there. Kieran looks at the pink-haired girl hiding behind the training field door and comments to Ian that he enjoys watching her, though she believes she hasn't been noticed by them. Continuing his speech, Kieran says it is like watching a wild animal being slowly tamed, and his servant asks if he has ever tamed an animal in the past. Kieran begins to remember. Approximately 10 years ago, a small fox apparently attached itself to the young Kieran, brushing against his leg. His former tutor tells him it is quite rare for a wild fox to follow a human. Clinging to the little animal, Kieran says he even finds it somewhat irritating, but his teacher, amused by it, tells him that the boy lets the little fox sleep in his room every night. The fox affectionately licks Kieran's hand, who tenderly places her on his shoulder, and then his tutor tells him to give her a name, so he won't lose her. Heavy doors close, echoing through the palace. Kieran places the little fox under his bed and asks her not to leave his quarters that day. Very frightened, he tells the small animal that his brother will go out hunting. Caressing the small creature, he tells her that if his brother sees her, and is unable to finish the sentence, repeating instead that she must not leave the room. Haunted by what lies before him, Kieran sees the body of his fox friend, already lifeless. Returning to the present, the sovereign tells Ian that he lived something like that a long time ago. He asks Ian if he knew that the first thing to do when capturing a wild animal is to build a strong cage. The sovereign continues, saying that the animal must be locked up and made to understand it will never be able to escape from that place. Anne and Melusine talk at the entrance of the training field. The mermaid, always radiant, laughs at something her maid tells her. Kieran, distant in his thoughts, finishes the sentence he was saying, explaining that the animal must be contained, even if this confinement kills it. At night, outside the palace walls, Melusine and Kieran walk on a beach by the kingdom's cliffs. She, amazed, looks at the ocean. Excited, the young woman tells Kieran to look at the ocean, but he merely asks if she likes the sea that much. He tells her to approach the water, and she, confused, asks if he would come too. The man with black hair and amber eyes with an enigmatic smile tells her he will stay there waiting for her. As she walks slowly toward the water, he says he would like to check something. She turns to him and asks what he would like to check. In the imperial forest, the little fox's body lies on the grass. Kieran, very frightened, wonders why, even after having asked several times for the little animal to stay in his room. Hearing the sound of horses galloping, Kieran panics under the dark thought of being caught by his brother. Shedding tears, the young boy gazes at the little animal. Back in the present, the mermaid Melusine cheerfully walks toward the sea. Her feet touch the crystal clear water of the ocean. Ian shouts to His Majesty that the mermaid will escape, but Kieran raises his hand, stopping him and asking him to let her go, for he would like to test her to see if she would try to escape. Melusine lifts her dress and shimmering scales begin to appear on her legs. Holding her dress and very happy, she enjoys that moment, telling her beloved ocean how much she misses it. Ian, this time more desperate, tells his sovereign that the seawater made her legs turn back into a tail, and Kieran, sternly, calls her back. The beautiful young woman considers diving in, lost in her thoughts of longing for the sea. Furious, Kieran shouts for her to return immediately. The mermaid apparently does not hear very well the furious shouts of her lover and cheerfully asks him for a few moments. After all, he allowed her. Suddenly, the two men on the beach see a great wave in the sea, where our protagonist had just dived. Overcome with rage, Kieran growls her name, asking how she dares to leave him. Possessed by anger, Kieran rushes toward the ocean, frightening Ian. In his painful memories, the sovereign remembers his tutor's words, that if he had named the fox, he would not lose her. But that happened anyway, bringing great pain to young Kieran. As he runs enraged after the mermaid, he spirals into a frenzy of thoughts about how giving a name to a creature is not enough to make it stay. He laments not having chained and caged his fox friend, thinking that way she would not have been hurt. After all, there is always someone lurking, ready to take what you could not protect. The young mermaid comes out of the ocean with water dripping from her garments. Without understanding what was happening, completely soaked, she wrings her hair to remove the excess seawater. Kieran runs toward her impetuously. With brutality, he grabs the fragile girl's arm and pulls her to him. Holding her tightly, he kisses her intensely. What at first seemed like a beautiful moment is revealed to be one of despair, in which he forces the girl to kiss him while she tries to say his name. Unable to resist much, she kisses him back. Then suddenly, she feels the cold blade of his dagger near her skin. Holding the girl by the hair and with the knife at her delicate neck, Kieran asks her if she missed the sea so much that she would dare leave him behind. Terrified, she says she would not leave him, that she only wanted to swim a little, and that she would never go away. Kieran, merciless, asks the mermaid how he could ever trust her. Holding her firmly by the hair, he speaks harshly that one should not leave a beast loose without a collar, but she still does not understand his words. Terrified, he smiles wickedly and tells her that her sweet nature weakened him, and that he was the one responsible for what had happened. Melusine finds Kieran's attitude very strange. The man holds the delicate woman by the shoulders, turning her toward the ocean, and maliciously tells her to take a good look, for she will never see it again. Before her, the gleaming blue ocean was lit by a huge full moon. Protesting, the mermaid is carried away from the sea by Kieran. Ian, worried about his sovereign, runs after the couple. Kieran, in a very serious tone, orders everyone to return to the palace without letting go of the mermaid. Frightened, the mermaid hears her lover dismiss everyone, and Kieran announces that he will spend the night at the guard post. The great building that serves as the guard post on the coast looms in the distance. Holding the girl very tightly, Kieran forces her inside the quarters. With brutality, he throws the delicate girl onto the bed. He removes the cufflinks from his shirt. The black-haired man begins unbuttoning the white shirt, while the young woman, distressed, tells him she is in pain. He climbs onto the bed where he had thrown her moments before. Scared and breathless, Melusine looks at Kieran approaching, her clothes still soaked from the sea. He grabs the mermaid by her waist, laying her down on the bed as he climbs on as well. Intimidating the delicate girl who is already quite frightened, Kieran asks her what he should do with her. Caressing Melusine's trembling face with a dominant touch, Kieran declares that a simple collar would not be enough, and that he does not amuse himself with the idea of tying her up. Severe, he calls her again and says that because he gave her a name, she must obey him. Melusine, very intimidated by the situation, whispers, repeating the sovereign's words. He presses his thumb against the mermaid's tongue. Bringing her closer, Kieran orders her to tell him that she will obey him, that she belongs only to him, and that she will not look at others. Timidly, the young woman repeats only part of the phrase in a tone of fear. With Kieran's thumb in her mouth, she continues to say slowly that she belongs to him. He laughs wickedly. Holding her face firmly, he seizes the frightened girl. In the midst of a forced kiss, Kieran tells Melusine that she must never disobey him again. He throws his large body over her, prolonging the kiss. Out of nowhere, he forces 2 fingers into Melusine's mouth. She coughs hard after the gesture, while he keeps her in the same position. Placing the fingers beneath the girl's thighs, Kieran tells her not to spit so soon. Melusine screams, frightened by the man's action. The mermaid, not accustomed to the sudden gesture, begs Kieran to stop. He ignores the girl's pleas, kissing her neck. Trembling, she clutches the sheets. The young woman loses her breath as she feels immense pain. Kieran, with the mermaid's arms around his neck, laughs with malice. Panting, the young blue-eyed girl begins to recall past moments with Kieran. Melusine finally realizes that this situation is quite different from what she had experienced with him before, understanding that what they lived was not spending the night together, and that perhaps this is necessary for her to have a mermaid baby. Suddenly, Kieran places her on his lap, and she, astonished, asks if it is over. Sarcastically, he declares that she must be joking, and she stares at him, embarrassed. Holding the girl's hand, Kieran tells her that the night is only beginning. The windows of the quarters are illuminated by the moonlight. Melusine experiences very new sensations, and Kieran tells her not to bite her tongue. The girl writhes in her lover's arms. Suddenly, she feels a flood of sensations. Melusine and Kieran share that very special moment together. By accident, she bites her lover's thumb. Annoyed, Kieran reminds her that he had told her to relax. The night continues, and they enjoy it together. Melusine gently holds Kieran's face and kisses him with great love. Smiling, the mermaid tells her beloved that she likes him very much. Kieran stares at her in silence. As she falls asleep, the sovereign embraces her and questions what power it is that the mermaid has over him. Bathed in sunlight, a dazzling palace rises imposingly before a cliff, with the ocean just below. The light passes through the sumptuous windows. She awakens, blinking her blue eyes. Her maid, Anne, calls her worriedly, asking if she is all right. Confused, Melusine sits up in her bed as the girl touches her forehead, giving thanks to God that she is awake. Holding Melusine's cheeks, Anne comments that she is relieved she has awoken, after sleeping for 2 whole days, and the mermaid mutters that she is fine. Melusine asks where she is, and her maid tells her that she is in her chambers, finely decorated with ornaments that resembled scales. And finally, Anne asks if she is feeling pain in any part of her body. Our protagonist asks Anne where Kieran is. Then her maid answers that His Majesty is not in the palace because he went out to welcome a guest. The afternoon sun illuminates the peaceful city of the Empire. Anne confides to Melusine that the daughter of the Marquis of Hethnal came to visit him, and tells the mermaid that the lady is Kieran's fiancée. Anne brushes Melusine's beautiful pink hair while explaining how marriages work, in which a man and a woman join together. Attentively, the mermaid listens as Anne explains that in such a union, vows are made to God to spend the rest of life with the loved one. And before that, there is the engagement. Then, Melusine asks her maid about Kieran having spent the night with her and with that other young woman the other time, but Anne explains to her that those were different situations from marriage. Grumbling a little, Anne explains to the young woman that the sovereign has such liberties for not yet being a married man, and for being part of the imperial family, he does whatever he pleases. In her tank, the innocent Melusine turns to the maid and declares that she does not quite understand the situation, since having more partners is ideal for having more babies. Gently reprimanding her, Anne hopes that the young lady will not say such words outside of her chambers, and bidding her farewell politely, she informs her that she will be absent during the afternoon, and Melusine asks her why. Melusine hears the maid tell her that the head chambermaid gave her some tasks, and because of this, she needs to go to the city. Then, Anne tells her that outside the palace there is a village, with many markets and many people, which becomes especially crowded during the Harvest Festival. In the entire empire, that is the biggest festival celebrated during the year, where many exotic things are sold and there are many performances in the streets. The beautiful protagonist is impressed with Anne's description and becomes excited to go to the city with her. However, the orders are for Melusine to remain in the palace. But with her big blue eyes, the mermaid begs Anne to take her along, and Anne ends up giving in. They leave Melusine's luxurious chambers. In the city, many people walk, talk, buy all sorts of things. Carriages cross the alleys and merchants. In the royal carriage, one of the chambermaids asks Anne, whispering, if they really have permission to take the mermaid to the city. Melusine, radiant with joy, puts part of her body outside the carriage to observe life in the city. Anne confides to the other maid that the young lady really wanted to go, and the vice commander allowed it, especially because she cannot walk very well, so she cannot go far. Turning to the girls in the carriage, Melusine calls Anne to point at something outside. Pointing at a chicken, she asks what that animal with red seaweed on its head is. Now pointing at a building, the young lady asks what those hares are, and her maid answers that they are crows. Looking at a bald man, Melusine calls him an octopus, causing embarrassment among the chambermaids accompanying her. Sometime later, the 3 young women arrive at the final destination and get out of the carriage. Anne needs to get some provisions at a shop and asks Melusine to wait, accompanied by the royal guard, and the young lady agrees. Exhausted from the trip, the 2 maids ask the soldier to keep a close watch on the mermaid, who was already about to run away. Impressed by the profusion of colors, smells, and different people in the city, she thinks there is nothing like that in the palace. Our protagonist is fascinated as she absorbs all those new things that are part of Kieran's world, her beloved. Suddenly she stops, hearing a familiar song. A discreet melody flows through the city, and that singing seems to catch Melusine's attention somehow. An old woman with a hood sings the melody of the mermaids. Melusine moves away from the guard, who immediately tells the young lady not to stray. Impulsive, Melusine tells the guard to wait for her, now certain that the singing belongs to a mermaid sister. Dazed, the guard calls the mermaid again. Amid the crowd of people, during a moment of distraction, Melusine runs away from the guard, who loses sight of her. The old woman, crouched on the ground, asks for help from those passing by, and the mermaid manages to locate her. Citizens of that village move away from the old woman with prejudice as she begs them for help, until Melusine hears her speaking in their ancient language, crying out for her Serenhide. Speaking in the ancient tongue of the mermaids, the young woman asks the old one if she is hurt and if she needs help. The old woman is startled by the mermaid disguised as a human in front of her. Leaping at Melusine, the surprised old woman recognizes her as a sister. Still in the ancient language, the young mermaid offers her food. The starving old woman accepts the young lady's help in supplication. Melusine, her heart touched by the plight of a fellow sister, nods. Desperate, the soldier tries to reach the young pink-haired lady. Taking a raw fish from the nearest stall, Melusine orders the guard to buy it for her, to save her sister's life. The young lady thanks the guard and immediately runs off. A very frightened brown horse rears up on its front legs. The carriage driver, enraged, orders Melusine and the old woman to get out of his way. The soldier, calling for Melusine, struggles to push through the crowd. Begging for the old woman's life, Melusine asks the furious coachman to wait. The man, seething with rage, raises his hand in a violent gesture. Kieran, imposing, appears and prevents something grave from happening. Panting, the man is startled by the figure of His Majesty. Kieran, with a piercing expression, orders the man to lower his hand. Throwing himself to the ground and bowing, the man begs for imperial forgiveness, while Melusine brightens up at seeing Kieran for the first time in a while. The young lady runs toward him. Melusine throws herself into his arms, but the black-haired man remains still and indifferent. She embraces Kieran, telling him that she misses him very much. Letting out a deep sigh, Kieran looks around. Confused, Melusine lets go of him. In silence, Kieran hears someone calling him from afar, and it is a beautiful woman with long blonde hair and a sumptuous red dress, stepping down from a carriage. With an ambitious expression, the young lady recognizes Kieran in the middle of the crowd. Turning to greet the lady in the red dress, Kieran moves Melusine behind him. Apologizing for appearing at such a troubled time, the blonde lady curtsies, and Kieran admits his share of fault, while Melusine, silently, observes the scene. Admiring him with her violet eyes, the lady praises Kieran and mentions a recent victory of the sovereign. Kieran merely replies that Marquis Hethnal had said she would only visit him next week. Melusine peeks from behind Kieran's broad shoulders while the blonde girl justifies herself, claiming to have been a little hasty, and she hears the young lady tell the sovereign that she could hardly wait to see the castle with her own eyes, and that she was very curious since it will soon be her new home. Over his shoulder, Kieran looks at Melusine. The blonde lady hopes Kieran will not consider her rude for her attitude, and the sovereign, shaking his head, says no, and that she may accompany him from then on. She thanks him for the suggestion with a smile as she holds a fan. Suddenly, her violet eyes change expression. Taking Kieran's hand, the lady declares that she would never dare reject such an honor. Turning to look at Melusine, she asks Kieran who that young lady is. Without looking at her, Kieran says an introduction will not be necessary, for she is just a very undisciplined pet. With a graceful smile, the lady in the red dress declares that the prettier the pet, the harder it is to keep it. Melusine reaches out to Kieran, calling him softly. However, the black-haired man, without looking at her, orders her to stay. The carriage moves away and the sound of the wheels echoes on the stones of the village. Desolate, our protagonist watches as the entourage departs. The memory of Kieran echoes in her thoughts, for she noticed he was acting very strangely. Melusine is paralyzed in her thoughts. Stealthily, the elderly woman who was her mermaid sister approaches from behind the young one. She whispers something in the ancient tongue. Grabbing the mermaid's arm tightly, the old woman tells her that when the time comes, Melusine must choose the ocean. The old woman's hands clutch tightly the delicate arm of the young one. Confused and frightened, Melusine replies that she does not understand. The old woman, with eyes shining dangerously, tells the girl that if she thinks too much, it will be too late. Already in her chambers, Melusine, in a beautiful red and cream dress, sits sighing on her bed. Anne asks her if she intends to spend another day locked in her room, but the mermaid changes the subject and says she does not know if Kieran will see her, and the maid replies that His Highness has been very busy lately. Trying to cheer the young one, Anne tells her that when he finishes his duties, he will surely come to find her, but Melusine is insistent and asks if she cannot go after him. Quickly, the maid tells her she should not do that. Resigned, Melusine listens to Anne's advice. Thinking of distracting the sad young one, Anne suggests they take a walk through the garden, for new roses have been planted and that will surely cheer her up. In the palace garden, very red roses sprout from the foliage. Still quite sad, she thinks Anne is a liar, for that walk did not cheer her up one bit. Melusine strolls through the garden, remembering the first time she was in the garden with Kieran. Missing her beloved very much, Melusine hardly hears that there is movement in the garden. Then she realizes she is not alone there. The young blonde lady who saw her in the city suddenly appears. Rudely dismissing one of the palace maids, the lady notices Melusine's presence. With a slight sarcastic smile appearing on her lips, the lady asks if the young one remembers her. The blonde woman approaches Melusine, telling her it is good to see her again, but that she does not recall her name. The mermaid replies, and the lady praises her, saying it is a beautiful name. The lady then invites the young one to accompany her on a walk. As they walk through the palace garden, the young blonde laments that they could not get to know each other before that incident. Interested in learning more about Melusine, the blonde lady questions her about where she comes from and to which family she belongs. However, our protagonist does not understand absolutely anything. Frustrated at not understanding much of what the lady says, Melusine remains silent while the other woman mutters several names of noble families of the kingdom. Then the mermaid reveals to her that she comes from Berceuse. Incredulous, the blonde lady stares at Melusine, who confirms it is Berceuse, the ocean. With an irritated look, the lady tells her that there are no nations in the ocean, only arid islands where legend says mermaids live. The young blonde, still in disbelief, asks if Melusine is a mermaid of the ancient legends, and she smiles sweetly. She confirms that she is a mystical mermaid, and she is rudely interrupted by the maid who accompanied the blonde lady. The maid rudely shouts at Melusine, ordering her to stop telling such absurd lies to your ladyship, who is merely amused by the whole situation. The lady stares at Melusine in silence. She looks at her slightly wounded bare feet. Murmuring behind her fan, the lady understands why her fiancé calls the young woman a pet. Closing her fan as a sign of relief, the lady says she is grateful. Suddenly, she thrusts the fan into the young woman's throat, declaring that Kieran normally does not keep pets, which is why she was concerned. But since Melusine is a mermaid, she understood. In a snobbish manner, the lady continues, after all, everyone wishes to keep valuable artifacts for themselves. She pulls the fan away from the young woman's throat. Presumptuous, the lady steps back, telling her it is a joy to see a different side of her fiancé, and Melusine finally decides to ask her name. Turning to the mermaid, the young woman introduces herself as Esther Hethnal, heiress of the Marquis of Hethnal, and fiancé of Archduke Kieran. The lady, very pedantic, orders that from now on she expects Melusine to refer to her using her royal title, but our protagonist is still too shocked. Confused, Melusine repeats the word fiancé, not quite understanding her role. She decides to ask Esther if she too had already spent the night with Kieran. Furious, Esther claims that the young woman's recklessness is beginning to lose its charm. Striking the girl with her fan, Esther yells at her, questioning why she would ask such things and saying there is no problem with Kieran having a night of fun. In a fit of rage, Esther tells her that nothing changes even if Kieran uses Melusine once or twice, and asks her if she is pregnant. Startled, the maid calls out to your ladyship. Melusine holds her belly, saying she wishes to carry Kieran's child soon. Laughing maliciously, Esther declares, "It is a pity, for if that happens, both she and the baby will die." Frightened, Melusine repeats the words of the cruel lady. Esther, in her arrogance, asks Melusine if she does not understand that the lady is being benevolent in letting her go, and that every noble in the kingdom has one or two mistresses. To the lady, what matters is that Melusine and Kieran do not produce heirs. Enraged, Esther tells her that bastards in that kingdom were seen as plagues, more despised than sinners, and asks her why His Majesty would have children with her, inadvertently revealing that Kieran carries traumas from rumors of his own illegitimacy. Once again, striking the young woman with her purple fan, Esther tells the mermaid that she is useless to him. Drawing dangerously close, Esther repeats that, despite everything, if she becomes pregnant by her fiancé, both will be killed. Melusine is left alone in the garden as the presumptuous lady walks away. Devastated by the situation, our protagonist remains silent. At night, in a palace with lit windows, a glass of liquor is served, and a voice tells Kieran that they heard he met Esther in the city earlier that day. The Marquis of Hethnal, sitting in a sumptuous armchair, apologizes for his daughter's actions, who must have rushed from her kingdom especially to see him. Taking a sip of his drink, Kieran tells him there is no problem, and the Marquis laughs, telling him that his glacial reputation precedes him. Laughing maliciously, Kieran asks what the subject of that meeting is. He continues asking if the only reason the Marquis sought him before the banquet was to converse, or if there was another motivation behind it. Shrewdly, the noble asks Kieran about his plans to seize the imperial throne, and if the Archduke has any date in mind. Adjusting himself in his armchair, the sovereign replies that he was curious to know why he had been attracting so much attention and what his hurry was. Laughing nervously, the Marquis tells His Majesty that indeed nothing escapes him. Then, the noble continues, reminding him that the palace of Certas will be completed in the winter. Kieran merely observes him in silence, and the Marquis suggests that the Emperor, who eagerly awaits that palace, should meet his fate before a new imperial era begins. Kieran, very serious, then suggests that he is saying they should take advantage of the new palace's delivery as an opportunity to kill the Emperor and seize the throne. The Marquis tries to persuade the Archduke, claiming that most nobles are on their side. The sovereign interrupts his guest's words to remind him that the Empress will give birth in the spring, and with such recklessness they risk dividing the nobles and even suffering retaliation from other nations. The Marquis, though acknowledging the importance of the point, insists that Kieran act soon, fearing leaks after so much preparation. The elderly man continues, saying that some nobles have been dissatisfied with the Emperor for some time already, but Kieran, firm in his stance, merely repeats the Marquis' words. Kieran directly questions the man before him, asking him if his desire to end this before his daughter's wedding is what is influencing his plans. After all, Kieran ponders, if he were to become Emperor first, the heiress of Hethnal would become Empress with minimal minimal risk, but instead of answering, the Marquis stammers. Laughing, the sovereign justifies that he pushed his bluff too far after going so long without seeing the Marquis. In the moonlit hall, the men converse, and Kieran tells the noble that he will reconsider the timing of the plans. The Marquis, trying to prolong that conversation, declares to the Archduke that his intentions in joining forces with him do not involve making his daughter empress, and that Kieran has always been his only ruler. Kieran takes a sip from his glass of drink, and then he thanks the Marquis for his time and dismisses him. Doors are closed in the palace. The Marquis walks away from the hall while his lackey follows him anxiously, seeking to know how the meeting with Kieran went. The dissatisfied old man confesses to him that this time he did not go against his plans, but that he does not have much hope, as Kieran has given up several other times, saying that his servant should not worry because the only person who despises the emperor as much as they do is the Archduke himself. Recalling a cruel past, the Marquis tells his servant that the former monarch used to send Kieran to many wars. However, something must have changed in the sovereign, who, tired of being manipulated by his older brother, decided to plan to usurp the throne and accepted to marry the Marquis's daughter. The old Marquis continues his speech, saying that the hatred the sovereign feels for the late emperor and the current one is deeply rooted, so there is no reason to worry. In the hall bathed in the night, Kieran contemplates the silence while holding his glass of drink. With an enigmatic expression, the man does not utter a single word, absorbed in his thoughts. Returning to the drastic memories of his past, young Kieran cries on his knees on the floor while begging his cruel brother. The emperor stands and tells the young boy how immensely disappointed he is with his immaturity after ordering him to kill his tutor. Kieran trembles in fear, crouched on the floor. The cruel figure asks him if he still harbors affection for that traitor, and the young boy is unable to respond, utterly terrified. The cruel emperor reveals to the boy that the one who confided this to him was the Marquis of Hethnal, who stands behind Kieran's brother. Then, the monarch declares that the Marquis told him that Kieran has been having nightmares ever since he was forced to kill his former teacher, very personal matters that the boy had confided to Hethnal, believing him to be a trustworthy friend. Furious, Kieran's brother also tells him that he discovered the boy's intentions of no longer going to war. With a whip in hand, the cruel emperor states that the future Archduke of his empire cannot be weak, and that apparently he will have to correct his younger brother's attitude once and for all. Coldly, he orders the Marquis of Hethnal to close the doors of that hall. Obeying the orders of his sovereign without looking at the young man weeping on the floor, the Marquis closes the heavy doors of the chamber. Kieran's figure seems to be swallowed by the heavy doors of the place. The poor boy cries in terror, imagining what will happen. The heavy palace doors close with a dull thud. Laughing with scorn, Kieran puts his hand to his forehead and mocks the Marquis's attempt to flatter him by saying that he was his only ruler. Ian enters and asks if he may have a moment with his sovereign. Then he tells him that during the afternoon he saw Esther and Melusine walking together through the imperial garden. Letting out a deep sigh, Kieran admits that he imagined Esther was plotting something when he saw her at the market. Perhaps she wanted to see the mermaid with her own eyes. Ian laments what happened and says he should not have allowed Melusine to go to the city, and asks Kieran if he would like her to be kept confined from now on. Kieran denies it, but replies that Esther is a shrewd woman who would check if the young girl threatened her position, and overprotecting the mermaid could be a dangerous measure. Looking at his reflection in the window, Kieran resigns himself to say that the best option is to leave things as they are for now. Since he managed to show Esther that he has no interest in Melusine, the sovereign judges that once she confirms what she wants, she will yield. A brush with golden ornaments brushes long blonde hair. Esther turns to greet the one who has just arrived in her chambers. Looking at Anne, she confirms if she really was Melusine's maid. Anne, very tense, asks if your ladyship had summoned her. Using her best false smile, Esther tells the maid that her only desire is to become close to the young girl, proposing an invitation to the masquerade ball that will take place in a few days. Esther's request seems more like an order, telling Anne to indeed take her to the ball. Concerned for the young mermaid's safety, Anne begins to make excuses for Melusine not to go to the ball, blaming her fragile constitution, but Esther refuses. Anne swallows her fear, admitting to herself the feeling that she must not allow Lady Esther to approach Melusine. The lady, although very beautiful, has a gaze laden with malice. Anne realizes that Ian had warned her that this sort of thing could happen, and that Kieran had ordered that no decision regarding the mermaid be made without his consent. Trying not to give in, the servant knows that the mermaid is very important to the sovereign and does not intend to let her go anywhere without his approval. Esther is outraged at Anne's refusal. The blonde lady gives orders to her maids, who brutally seize Anne and throw her to the floor, injuring her. Esther approaches the terrified young woman on the ground, sternly telling her that this was not a request, but but an order. Anne is very frightened by that situation. The blonde lady, addressing the maid who trembled in fear on the floor before her, asks them to try once again. Esther questions Anne about the lack of trust between the two of them. The maid is panting heavily, terrified by the lady's cruelty. The young blonde cruelly proposes kidnapping Anne's 3 younger brothers so that they may prove their worth on the battlefield. Consumed by agony, Anne begs your ladyship to spare her brothers, for they are still very young. Leaning toward the maid, Esther maliciously asks if she does not want her help, placing her brothers in the trenches. Anne shudders violently. Tears roll down her face as Anne, resigned, accepts to obey Esther's orders, in exchange for her sparing her brothers' lives. The cruel lady says that she will be waiting. A few days later, a rosy sunset falls upon the palace of Triton. The young girl stands still while Anna applies makeup to her face. Melusine looks beautiful, in a lovely pale pink and red dress, with a beautiful bow at the front and flower patterns. Then, she asks Anne where she is going, dressed like that, but the maid freezes for a moment, remembering Esther's wicked request. Holding a small golden box, Anne asks her if she remembers the conversation they had about the harvest festival, and the mermaid confirms that she does. Cheerful, Melusine thinks of all the things she will see. Flowers, sweets, and much more. Without looking into the young girl's eyes, Anne tells her that it is the last day of the festival, and that there will be a banquet at the beginning of the evening. Trying to hide her discomfort, Anne tells Melusine that she will go, put on a mask, and will be able to enjoy herself dancing and meeting many people. But Melusine has only one person in her mind and heart, Kieran. So, she asks her maid if she will be able to meet him at the ball. Suddenly, a knocking sound is heard at the door of the mermaid's chambers. The two are briefly startled by the sound and turn their attention to the entrance. Anne, shivering, begins to speak to the mermaid, but is inevitably interrupted by Esther's maid, who bursts open the doors, saying she was sent there to fetch Melusine. Melusine is not pleased to hear the name of the terrible lady. The blonde lady's maid announces that they must leave immediately. Furthermore, she asks Melusine to put on shoes. Anne immediately kneels to put proper shoes on the mermaid, even against her protests, begging her to wear the shoes for one night. She also says that if she goes to the banquet, she might find Kieran there. Confiding without Esther's maid hearing, Anne tells Melusine to ask Kieran for help if she finds him at the ball. Melusine does not understand the fear present in her maid's words. In great haste, Esther's servant drags Melusine through the ornamented corridors of the palace. They stop in front of the great doors of a hall, and the mermaid is nearly out of breath. Then, the woman hands the mermaid a red mask decorated with flowers. Melusine, hesitant, puts on the mask. The mermaid admits to herself how apprehensive she is, but steps into the grand ballroom, wishing she might find Kieran there. Perhaps he can explain what is happening. The beautiful golden hall is ready to receive the guests of the masquerade ball for the banquet. The young girl is impressed by the beauty of the place. While she is admiring the grandeur of the chamber, a man stealthily approaches her. She turns to him, and he asks her if she is lost, and another man comes closer. Defiantly, the young girl says she would like to see Kieran, and they stare at her in silence. Laughing nervously, the men ask if it is His Majesty she is speaking of. Other guests begin to recognize Melusine as the girl who is with the sovereign in the village outside the castle. Some others present begin to whisper and giggle. Esther's maid, who had already disguised herself with a mask, begins to draw the attention of the other guests there toward Melusine. Then she shouts that the young girl is wearing a dancer's mask. Esther, in her dark purple garments, approaches the commotion, telling them that perhaps the girl had been brought by Kieran to perform for the guests. They nod, laughing among themselves, assuming that the Archduke truly knows how to throw a party. Suddenly, one of the men there pulls Melusine's hair. They begin to surround her in a threatening manner, asking her to dance for them. In tears, Melusine feels a hand touching her shoulder. She recognizes Esther, who ironically says how good it is to see her there. The blonde approaches, whispering in her ear that the young girl does not recognize her place, pointing to the men who desired her with lust and the women who mocked her. Esther tells her that this is how His Majesty treats her. Crying, Melusine tells Esther that Kieran does not treat her that way, but the woman, merciless, grabs her by the shoulders and tells her she can cry as much as she wants, but no one will come to help her. Then, in an act of cruelty, Esther throws Melusine to the floor, but fortunately she falls into the arms of her beloved, who had just arrived at the ball. She looks up, stunned, not knowing who had saved her from the fall. Almost without recognizing him, she sees Kieran masked, formally dressed for the event. Kieran stares down at Melusine with a serious expression. The mermaid rejoices in recognizing her beloved. She leaps into his arms, happy to see him there at the ball. However, without saying anything, he firmly grabs her hand. Hurriedly, he drags her out of the hall, under protests from the other guests, who thought Melusine was a dancer. Confused, the men present begin to wonder what was happening. However, one of them believes that the figure who took the girl was the Archduke himself. Kieran quickly takes Melusine outside the palace. One of the guests asks Esther what could have made Kieran so suddenly enraged. Esther, adorned with beautiful earrings and a wicked gaze, remains silent. In the palace garden, at dusk, Kieran and Melusine face each other. He scolds her, reminding her how he told her to stay in her chambers, and asks the girl why she always disobeys him. Ashamed of what happened, Melusine confesses to him that she missed him. She gazes at Kieran with her beautiful blue eyes and declares that she only went to the ball because she longed for her beloved. He holds her face and harshly asks the mermaid if she dressed like a courtesan because she missed him. Removing his mask, he looks at her and asks if she would like him to treat her like a dancer. Suddenly, Kieran pulls her in and kisses her. It is not just a simple kiss. It seems the sovereign also longed for her greatly. The two forget the rest of the world and kiss as only a deeply in love couple can. The man kisses along her neck and the young girl feels intoxicated with love. Suddenly, he stops and looks at Melusine. Then, to the girl's surprise, he warns her that it is her last chance to stop acting that way and return to her chambers. She clutches his garments tightly. He turns to hear what she was going to say, and she repeats how much she missed him, asking the sovereign if he will go to her room again. Sad with the whole situation, Melusine asks Kieran if he no longer wishes to see her. Touching her face, he tells her that she must have interpreted everything wrong. Facing the young girl, Kieran tells her that she is not important to him. He continues speaking, telling the mermaid that it is not as if they had ever truly shared any sort of relationship, and the young girl listens to it all without words. The man turns to leave, ordering Melusine not to harbor feelings for him anymore, and that everything they had lived only existed in her imagination. The young girl remains alone in the garden as the sunset advances. The new roses adorn the imperial garden, and golden gates gleam with the end of the day. Esther finally reaches Melusine, who is desolate in her thoughts. Scorning Kieran's attitude, Esther makes light of the situation. With malice in her words, the young blonde declares that she wished to make Melusine's first ball unforgettable, especially with that mask. The cruel lady reveals to the girl that those masks are reserved for women who trade their smiles for money. She asks the mermaid if Kieran did not even ask why she was wearing that kind of accessory, since he must judge her so inferior. Confused and sad, the young girl asks the blonde lady if she hates her. Esther observes her in silence for a moment, and then answers her that she does not hate her at all, and only wants to show the mermaid her rightful place. Merciless, the lady asks Melusine if she still wishes to have a child with Kieran, and the mermaid answers that she does. Cruelly, the lady declares that it will never happen, for the mermaid is nothing more than a toy the Archduke can discard at any moment without further consequences. The young woman with long blonde hair continues her monologue and tells the sorrowful girl that she is merely a doll to the sovereign. Withdrawing from the garden, still dripping her malice, the lady tells Melusine that soon enough he will throw her away again, as he did today. The heartless lady briefly turns to the young girl and declares that she was abandoned by His Majesty in the royal gardens. Melusine, anguished, absorbs the weight of those words, with the image of Kieran in her memory invalidating everything they had previously lived. The mermaid, in the imperial garden, questions why that abandonment. She remembers having heard from her sisters who never had children that they had been abandoned by their Serenhides, and that there is no return. A feeling grows stronger inside Melusine. Resigned, yet firm, the mermaid makes a decision. Since she and Kieran were finished, Kieran leaves the palace. The man remembers the words the mermaid had spoken to him before he dismissed her. The innocent young girl had repeated to him several times that she missed him. He ponders in silence. Esther approaches Kieran, asking him what he is doing there. She asks him if he lost something. Kieran replies with sarcasm that it is good to have someone like her so concerned about his well-being. And then the young woman asks him for a favor. The blonde-haired lady asks him to dance with her at the ball. She continues, telling him that there is a saying that the last couple to dance during the Harvest Festival banquet will be happy for many, many years. Laughing, she tells him that perhaps they will be happy until the end of their lives, and asks His Majesty if he would grant her such an honor. Ignoring everything Esther had said before, Kieran says that she did not need to go so far. Mocking the sovereign, the blonde woman claims not to know what he is talking about, but affirms with certainty that she does not care about the flies that hover around him, but if they are toxic, she herself will eliminate them. Esther coldly declares that this is what happens when he takes up a doll he never intended to keep. Kieran glares back at her, very irritated. Feigning sweetness, the arrogant lady extends her hand asking that he accept her for the dance. He simply replies no. Leaving the palace balcony and abandoning the young woman alone, Kieran says he forgot something in the garden, and Esther is left disappointed. The young woman's gaze changes completely, like that of a cynical person on the verge of collapse. Clasping her hands tightly, she trembles. She laughs scornfully at the situation. On the shore, small waves break, and the sea turns golden under the light of late afternoon. The mermaid walks along the seashore. She recalls the words of her sisters, that the first attempt to have a child is quite difficult, and that she could return to the ocean if she were in danger or facing hardships after all. For mermaids, children are the most important things in the world. The words of the cruel lady echo in her thoughts, that Melusine and her future child would be killed by Kieran. She remembers the tense moments in the garden in which Esther had threatened her. Melusine then resigns herself to leaving palace life behind to return to the ocean and eventually find another Serenhide. She wets her feet in the water, envisioning returning to her sisters. Should they ask her where she had been, she decides she will tell them she was captured in a fisherman's net, and she will also tell them about Kieran and how she had misunderstood him as someone capable of loving her, when in the end he was not her Serenhide. The sad young woman loses herself in her thoughts. Suddenly, she hears a loud neigh. Kieran's hand grabs her wrist tightly. Scolding her, he holds her and asks her since when that beach has been her chamber. She struggles in his arms, not understanding her beloved's fury. Furious, he orders her to stop acting that way, saying it is her last chance. He grabs her by the waist and places her on his black horse. She begs him to stop. Covering her mouth, he orders her to be silent, claiming he does not want to hear anything else. The two gallop on Kieran's black stallion, returning to the palace. Distressed without understanding the sovereign's intentions, she accuses him of having abandoned her. He does not understand how he could have done that and says they will talk when they reach the castle. She pushes his arm away, wanting him to keep his distance. The mermaid then assumes that if he did not abandon her, she truly must try to make him her Serenhide. Suddenly, she pulls him close and kisses him, longing deeply to have a child with him. He returns the kiss, blushing very subtly. Kieran runs his fingers along her thigh, and then he pushes her forward, asking her to bend her body and hold tight. Whispering in her ear, amid her beautiful pink hair, he tells her never to try running away from him again. He thrusts against the girl sitting on his lap. He holds the reins of the horse while saying he will do everything possible so that she won't be able to escape. Worried about the horse's very fast speed, Melusine tells Kieran that she is afraid he agrees and simply answers her to hold on. He kisses her again. The two of them ride together towards the palace of Triton. And that's it for today, everyone. Quite a story, isn't it? What did you think? Will Melusine truly find her destiny at Kieran's side, or will Esther's words come true? Oh, and a fun fact, this work was actually suggested by one of our followers. The manhwa's name is Melusine, and the recap we've got so far covers everything up until chapter 22. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss any new ones. See you next time.